Today we're going to talk about how to hold the bow hold. So this is one of the most mysterious things in learning the violin, and if you haven't learned how to hold the bow yet, then I feel for you because it can be very frustrating. So firstly, I'm going to show you a very simple starter bow hold which you can do when you first get your first violin and you just want to play but you don't want to have to spend 3 hours trying to figure out how to hold the bow every time you get the violin out. Then try this, okay? Straighten your fingers and thumb and make a crocodile mouth or alligator mouth, little Pac-Man kind of thing. But please note, I'm not curving. I've got straight fingers and thumb. Now, I want you to make some space between the fingers, keep them straight, and then grab the bow like this, on the top and the bottom at the end. So your little finger sits on that little metal bit and the other fingers are spaced out roughly equidistantly. I've got my thumb there. So this should feel strong, and if you're doing it correctly you should be able to do this by pressing the little finger down. So I've got a very low ceiling here. Pressing the little finger down like that, you should be able to lift the tip of the bow up. If you've got that, then this is perfectly fine for the beginning of using the bow. So I normally suggest people try to get used to playing in first position before using the bow, because then your left hand isn't struggling as well as your right hand because you know what to do with it a little bit more. So once you can play pizzicato with the left hand, then that's a great time to start using the bow. You know, you don't have to be super great with it, but just at least, you know, have an idea of where the notes are so you're not trying to think about both things at once. So pizzicato is done by placing the thumb on the corner of the fingerboard. Pizzicato means plucking, basically, like guitar. And then you curve over a nice strong finger like that. And by strong, I mean not floppy, but if you make that shape with it, then it should feel very strong. And then you can pluck just over the fingerboard, roughly 1 centimetre. Anyway, that's a side note. If you're struggling to do the left hand and the right hand at the same time, then focus on the left hand first. Okay, so if you are past the point of wanting to hold the bow like this and you want to take things further, then I'm going to talk you through now how I hold the bow, okay? So my bow hold is not the only way to do it. I just want to clarify that because sometimes in the comments people say, oh, you know, you could do it this way, you could do it that way. There are different ways to play and hold the violin, and it's really up to you and your body type to figure out what explanation works for you firstly. I think the first thing with the bow, and the most difficult thing is to, as a teacher, is to explain the dynamics of the bow in a way that makes sense to that student. So some people won't understand what I'm talking about at all, other people pick it up straight away. So if my bow hold explanation doesn't work for you, then you should try and watch other videos because different teachers have different ways of explaining it and one will speak to you. Okay, just bear with me. It's hot here. Okay, so here we go. To me, the explanation that made sense for me most when learning the bow was to understand the bow is like seesaw. Seesaw, if you don't know, is that thing in the playground. It's like a plank of wood and one person sit on one side, the other person sit on the other, and it go like that, okay? And in the middle, the seesaw sits on what's called a pivot, okay? So pivot, P-I-V-O-T, is anything shaped like that, which you can get a rocking motion on top of because there is a point. It's a mechanical term, pivot, P-I-V-O-T. If you don't know what this word means already, please look it up now so that you understand, because I'm going to be using it again in the video. I'll try to remember to include a description below as well. Okay, so the pivot is the thumb. So the thumb must be strong, like a pivot. In order to make it strong, we leave it slightly bent. just slightly bent. And to make it pivot-like, pivot is shaped like triangle, we must ensure that the thumb is on its side, because here we have a pivot-like point on the thumb. Okay, the thumb is not triangular, but what I'm trying to say is don't place the bow on the soft paddy part, because this is not a pivot. Imagine a seesaw on here, it's going to do nothing. But here we could maybe make our seesaw. Okay, seesaw, S-E-E-S-A-W, if you're interested in that word to see what that means as well. Okay, so on the seesaw, we have firstly the pivot placed roughly between this here, the nut of the bow, and this little soft paddy part here, which will either be made of plastic or leather normally on your violin. Sometimes it's wound, like a wound bit of plastic as well. Now you can see here, I don't know if you can see there actually, it's very close, but no, probably not. I have a little worn down bit right there. Let me just put that close, which is where I put my thumb. It's in the join between the leather and the wood, which I can very nicely nestle the side of my thumb where the nail bed starts. That's the point that we touch the bow. So where the start of your nail, as it starts to leave the nail bed there and be an independent nail where I'm touching, is where we put the bow. Okay, so if you're not sure, check where your nail bed starts. Mine's here. And place that exactly like I am on its side, touching the little leather bit, but ultimately on the wooden section there between these two. It's like 1 centimetre gap normally. Now we're going to place our first person on the seesaw, which is going to be our 4th finger. Okay, so once you've got the thumb there, I want you to place your 4th finger on top of the bow, like as if it was a standing up person. Okay, so we want it to be upright, not flat like that, like I explained that you should do in the beginner bow hold. For the professional bow hold, we have a standing up guy on a seesaw. So you can see there's a right angle between my finger and the bow. Okay, that is where it should be. Notice I don't straighten my finger and I don't knock the joints of the finger, I keep them bent. It's very important that your fingers are always bent, because we move them like springs in a suspension system on a car when we're bowing. Okay, so suspension, S-U-S-P-E-N-S-I-O-N, is the system in a vehicle which is made of springs, S-P-R-I-N-G-S, these curly springs. And every time your car goes over a bump, you don't feel so much of it because it gets absorbed by the springs, okay? And suspension is exactly what our fingers are doing for the bow. Because when we play the violin, what we don't want to happen is this. And if we use really straight fingers like that, we don't have a suspension system, so our bow's going to bounce, it's going to get that kind of sound. So if you're getting or that kind of sound when you're playing the violin, it's because you haven't got a suspension system in place. So it's like driving a really old car with no suspension and doof every time you go over a speed hump, okay? The sound of the bow hitting the string should be as smooth as possible, just like an aeroplane landing on a runway when it's been done really well, okay? So that's our goal with the bow. So going back to the bow hold, so now you understand why you should have a bent pinky being this 4th finger, on your violin bow. Okay, what happens next? So once we've got the pinky there, depending on the width of your hand span, so that's the distance between the thumb and the fingers, the size of your hand, the placement of the pinky will vary. So if you've got very small hands, then you might not be able to reach that far. And maybe you should bring it in a bit closer. But on average, I have mine roughly where the join is between the metal part and the wood. I have quite large hands for a woman. But if I teach men, often they have to bring it right to the end in order to feel comfortable. And when I teach children, sometimes they can't reach that far. But the further away the pinky is, the more control over the bow you have. Because the first exercise that we're going to do, just with the thumb and the pinky, is strengthen the pinky finger by creating our seesaw movement, okay? So very slowly, with the thumb and the pinky in place, I want you to just lift the tip of the bow by pressing the pinky down and then release, okay? So let me show you from this angle. Like that. So you press the pinky down and then you release. So that might feel, and again close up from this angle, that might feel pretty uncomfortable to you at first, and you may feel, just release. You don't need to lift the bow up to the ceiling. No more than 45 degrees is enough, but even if you're only getting a 10 degree lift at the beginning, that's fine. You probably will feel some pain in here, these muscles here after a while, and if you do, just take a break. You can do this for maybe 2 minutes a day, and you should strengthen that little finger. Another problem that you might encounter when trying to do this is that the joint won't stay in this shape. It should have, when you're holding it properly, a 90-degree angle. So this finger we're looking at here, forget the others. A 90-degree angle between this joint and this joint, roughly, in order to be strong enough to handle the weight of the bow. If you find that one of these joints keeps collapsing, I can't do it because my joints don't collapse. Okay, this one I can do it with, but sometimes this one collapses depending on how your hands are. Everyone's different. I think it's roughly half and half, who has joints that do that and who don't. There's an exercise here I can recommend. So this is the peg exercise. It's to strengthen the joints of your fingers. So I want you to basically place your little finger and your thumb so they're opposing each other like that. Try to make a right angle in the joints of the fingers and in the thumb as much as you can, so that the two are facing each other. So we're not like that or like that or like that or anything. It's a straight line, as straight as possible here. Okay, grab a peg, ta-da, and then use the thumb and the pinky to open the peg and close it again. And it should be quite difficult at first, and you might not be able to get much traction depending how strong the peg is. But this is excellent for strengthening these joints. And if you have trouble with any of the fingers with collapsing joints on either hand, you can use this exercise. Just swap the fingers around. Okay, so now you can do, hopefully, this, which is just to hold the bow with the pinky and the thumb. You've got the first part of the bow hold, so I'm going to move on to the rest of the bow hold now. Okay, in order to understand that, we need to go back to our seesaw analogy. Okay, so imagine your seesaw, we've got the thumb here, little finger here. When I've just got the little finger here, I can keep the seesaw straight because although there's nothing pressing down here, we have the weight of the bow to counteract the little finger's force exertion on top of the bow here. So the weight of the rest of the bow essentially is the counter force to the little finger pressing down there, and that is what, if the little finger was to go, what's going to happen? It's going to drop, okay? So how do we help the little finger so it doesn't have to take quite as much of the weight of the bow? Because if we were just bowing like this, then we're going to really hurt these muscles here over time. So we use this finger to assist the little finger by taking some of the weight of the bow. So these two here, by the way, they don't do much. They just sit on the side like that. So place them, before we move on to this finger, just place these fingers next to each other like that on the side of the black bit, you know, where the spot is on mine. You might not have a spot, but just there. They should just be chilling, Those fingers don't need to do much. All they need to do is be there. Just make sure when you're playing you're not lifting them like that, because you're causing tension in your hand. They should be relaxed, okay? Now, note as well, I also have here a slope in my knuckle. Just log that now, remember it, because we'll come back to it later. The little finger here, because it's shaped like this, means that the knuckle is raised in the air at the moment. And here, the index finger, the knuckle is pushing below the bow, okay? So we should see a dip here in the knuckle of the index finger if we do this correctly, okay? Just remember that. Now, with that slope in place, so how do you do that? You go from this shape, push the knuckle down of the index finger to try to get it as low as possible, okay? And also keep your elbow in the air. Don't have a bend in your wrist like that, because you'll have, over time, wrist pain here. So when we're bowing, we try to keep the wrist flat, okay? Not bent. So to do that, you just lift your elbow up, okay? All right, back to the index finger, this one. All right, so we're gonna wrap the index finger around the bow, like this, so that the paddy part there, that part, is underneath the bow, underneath, because it's going to help the little finger take the weight of the bow by kind of pulling up on the bow like that as you bow, okay? So for now, all you need to do is just ensure you wrap it round the bow. Now, how can we do that? You might find you can't reach, okay? I can't reach it to get it under. Why? The reason why is because you'll have your bow hold like that or something. You need to bring the knuckle up and above the bow. And that way you can get contact between the interior knuckle and the stick and wrap the rest of the finger around like that, okay? Where does it go? Let me just show you. It's easier to show you than to explain. It's wrapping around the metal part and touching the bow where the black part is for me, okay? Again, if your hand is wider than mine, or if your hand is smaller than mine, then it will probably be, if it's smaller, they'll be closer together. If it's wider, then they'll be further spread apart, okay? But this is just a rough guide. The most important thing is the mechanical dynamics rather than the wear, okay? So we've got this one on top, bent, these two chilling on the side, and then this one we wrap over, we bring the knuckle up and over in order to be able to wrap under the bow like that, okay? So now you should, if you're doing it correctly, you should have this diagonal slant between the pinky knuckle and the index knuckle, okay? Now, again, we can do this exercise, pressing the little finger down. You'll find now, if you're doing this correctly, there should be slightly less strain on the little finger, because this one here is helping the bow, okay? So, can you see that? It's like lifting weights in the gym from the floor, okay? Now, the nearest thing I can use to explain that particular action is in a building site where you have those trucks that have sort of mechanical hands that go and pick up rubble and place it from one pile of rubble into another. You are the mechanical hand. That's what your finger's doing. It's that movement, okay? Okay. So now we've got the bow hold hopefully in place. I'm going to go through it one more time with you. And then we're going to try some exercises, okay? So, hold the bow in the left hand, touch the stick, don't touch the hair. If you touch the hair with your fingers, then you can contaminate the bow hair with your skin oil, which will mean that it doesn't play as well. The bow should always be only rosin on the bow, please, okay? All right, so thumb bent on its side. It should be bent like a triangular structure to make a good pivot, not straight, okay? Bent on its side, we place the bow on the nail bed, then the pinky bent at a 90-degree right angle there, should place on top of the ferrule, the little bit of metal. And then these two just chill, and then this one here, bring the knuckle up and over the bow. Okay, if you can't do that, remember to bring the elbow up in the air. That will help you in case your wrist is bent. And then you should find here that you can see a diagonal angle. And if you're doing this correctly, like super correctly, you'll find your knuckle dips below the stick, okay? On that point, the knuckles must always be flexible on the violin. If you have tension in your knuckles, it's a great idea to massage them and start to stretch them like that, okay? If you've never played an instrument before, you might not be able to do this, or if you do something else with your hands, maybe you can, who knows, but you want to be able to flex your knuckles as much as you can as a way to keep them supple. So if you can't do them all with one finger, start with one at a time, bend them back, massage them with oil. I have a video which I'll link below, which is hand massages for musicians. So, I mean, it's fairly obvious how to massage your hand, but sometimes you forget why we need to do that. So going back, if you're having tension in your knuckles, then you'll probably not be able to do this at first. It's quite common when students first come to me, they can't, unless they're very young children, and you know, obviously they haven't developed tension in their hands so much from using phones and computers and all of the things adults have done in their lives with their hands that cause tension. So now, you should have your bow hold ready. Again, let's do it. I'm explaining this a lot because I know it's very easy to forget. So thumb bent, little finger, also bent at a right angle. Let these guys chill, wrap the stick around. You've got your angle. Okay, this is going to feel probably very awkward at first. The main thing to remember when you're bowing is relax the fingers, okay? Much easier said than done. But the tenser your fingers are, the less likely that your car suspension system or bow suspension system is going to work. They have to be like springs, okay? If these fingers are not springy, then you're not going to have a safe and comfortable landing when you land on the runway, as like the aeroplane, okay? So, the bow should move perpendicular to the strings. So again, we've got a right angle between the bow. So not like that, not like that. When you're doing bowing, roughly place the bow about halfway between the bridge and the fingerboard to start with. Okay, and I've got a very low ceiling here, so I'm going to stick with a D or an A string here. D is probably the easiest one to start bowing with. It has the nicest sound with the least amount of work. Okay, and we're going to place the bow on the string. So if you've got the beginner bow hold, then this is perfectly fine. You can still do the same exercise. And if you've got the adult bow hold by now, I'd be amazed if you're able to do this at first. What I would suggest you do is go away and practice the bow hold as much as you can. So every day, pick up the bow 5 or 6 times and go through it, and eventually by next week you should be fine, okay? If by some stroke of luck this is very easy for you, then let's go ahead, okay? Most of the time I let students have a go at this in their first bow hold lesson, okay? So, place your bow on the string right at the heel of the bow. So the heel is this end, this is the tip, also known as the frog, and the point, depending which terminology you've been taught. Okay? At a perpendicular angle to the string, so perfect right angle, and we're going to be trying to move parallel to the bridge the whole time, okay? So in order to do this properly, you're going to need a mirror. So you should stand, like I am, at a right angle, sorry, what am I talking about? Yeah, a right angle. The violin should be pointing at a right angle away from your mirror, exact right angle. So if the mirror is on that wall, point your violin to that wall if you have a square-shaped room, okay? So you can see the violin perfectly side on. If you've got this right, you shouldn't see the bridge except for the side of the bridge. So here, that's wrong, that's about right. Now, also, if your violin's pointing upwards or downwards, you have a problem with the shoulder rest or the chin rest, but that's another video. So your violin should be pointing to the perpendicular wall to the mirror. Place the bow on the heel. Forget the bottom 10 centimeters of the bow. Just start about here, you know, roughly where the metal starts. The reason why is because the bottom 10 centimeters involves more advanced technique in order to be able to get a good sound out of it, and we won't worry about that at the beginning. It's something to do later. So you can just avoid that part of the bow for now. All right, now we've got the bow on the string. I want you to very slowly move the bow from the heel to the tip, as slow as you can, whilst keeping it perpendicular to the strings or parallel to the bridge, okay? As slowly as possible. We're not trying to get a good sound here, we're trying to keep the bow parallel whilst holding the bow. Now, as you move towards the tip, your fingers and your bow hold should start to extend. Let me see if I can stand further enough back for you to see that. The pinky finger will end up straight once you get to the tip. And if your fingers are not locked and they remain always unlocked, so the joints are slightly bent, then you should be able to extend and contract the fingers as you move the bow. Okay, so as I move, let's see if I can get this closer for you. As I move the bow from the tip to the heel, watch what happens to my little finger. I start to slowly take the weight of the bow in the little finger, and as I do, I bend it more and more. The more weight I take, the more I bend the finger, and the thumb. The thumb as well will bend more. And when I get to the heel, it's completely bent. So, check now. Is your bow still perpendicular? Mine's slightly not. Straighten it, check in the mirror, and then start again. Repeat. Very slowly. Forget about making a good sound. Let's go as slowly as possible that you need to go in order to maintain a parallel bow to the bridge. And again, let's check that little finger here. My little finger has straightened out. It's not locked, notice. So a locked finger does that, an unlocked finger is like that. Okay? That's the difference. The joints are not locked. And then as I move up the bow, slowly, slowly, the little finger starts to take the weight of the bow, and I'll feel it more and more and more and more and more as I move to the heel. And then when I get to the heel, my little finger has bent in order to take the weight of the bow, okay? So repeat that exercise again daily, 2 to 5 minutes a day, using a mirror, and you should find that by the end of the week, you can move that bow pretty confidently without having to look in the mirror and keep it completely parallel to the bridge. Okay. That concludes our first lesson in the bow hold. If you're having any questions about this, please feel free to leave them in the comments because it inspires me to make new videos. And I'll do my best to produce a video about that. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. At the moment, I'm going to be making very regular content, so if you're wanting to get more technical information about the violin, then hit subscribe now. If you like the video, give it a like. Please note that I'm going to be teaching online from July 2024, so if you want to contact me about booking a lesson, then you can email theviolincoach@gmail.com. All of the details for that are in the description.